So we do this each year, as you're all well aware. We have the discussion this evening. It's our public meeting, and public hearing is required by law. And so for any of those in the audience that might have questions, this is intended to be a bit of an open forum. So if you have a question, maybe President Jimenez, if you could just alert me to it, because I won't see them behind me. And we'll try to get through this in fairly short order. The Board of Trustees is required to adopt a budget for 3 different funds for the school district each year. That would be the General Operating Fund, the Child Nutrition Fund, and the Debt Service Fund. As well, the board is required to adopt the tax rate for each year. Tonight, what we're discussing is the budget that will be presented to you for adoption later this evening in the regular board meeting. And we will be sharing with you the proposed tax rate as we know it at the time of this publication. But the action item on the tax rate itself will not take place until September, possibly August, depending on a couple of things that we'll talk about momentarily. So with our first portion here is just a copy of the newspaper ad that was published in June 2nd. And it shows the taxpayers what we know to be, what we believe to be the maximum tax rate at the time of publication. And so you'll notice the maintenance tax rate of 0.97640 and the debt service tax rate of 0.3850. Those are unchanged from the prior year. And we need to make sure that you realize that the state mandates what that maintenance tax rate will be ultimately, but they won't do that until we receive our certified values. And so the certified values do not actually come to the district. They're not published until late July. Thank you, Mr. Liss. Should have brought that over here. And so all of this information on these slides here gives you some basics for the property values here locally in the Seguin area. And so you can peruse through that at your leisure to see that we have had what appears to be some growth here locally. So despite the fact that the tax rate itself will not change because of the increases in valuation, not only in the Seguin area, but really all throughout the state, we should see at least close to the same revenue that we had last year from a local collection standpoint. What you might also want to keep in mind is the fact that because of House Bill 3 out of the 86th legislative session, whatever the tax collections are locally, the state will step in and make sure that the funding level, the target funding level per student is reached for the maintenance and operations side of operations, or side of our budget, the general operating fund. What the state will not do is step in and assist for the debt service fund. So that 38.5 cents is 99% what we use to pay debt service for the school district. We do receive a small amount of money from the state of Texas, something to the tune of $200,000. Keep in mind that our annual debt service requirement is about $12 million. So we don't get a lot of money from the state with regard to INS, but that's okay because we're about where we need to be. You'll notice we're projecting our fund balance for the current year, maintenance and operations, to be $28,352,161, and for the interest and sinking fund to be $11,700,950. Now, those are unaudited numbers at the moment, so they're subject to some change, but at the time of publication, that's what we were estimating. So let's look a little bit closer to our general operating fund. sorry to just basically read this, but it's high-level information. Like I said, happy to answer any detailed questions that anyone might have. But our general operating revenue projection right now is based on a student enrollment for next year of 7,188 students. Give you a little bit of comparative analysis. Right now, TEA is stepping in on behalf of Seguin ISD, as well as most districts throughout the state, with a hold harmless enrollment number. And that hold harmless enrollment number for the 2021 school year is 7,159 students. If you go back a year and you look at the 1920 enrollment numbers, we were at 7,226. Our actual enrollment numbers for the current year, if we weren't using the hold harmless number, are a little bit below what you're seeing there at the 7,159. But what you also want to keep in the back of your mind is that the start of the 2021 school year did not see 100% of our students enrolling. And so we had to migrate through the year, and we've been gaining ground over the course of the year. So what administration is hopeful for is that next year, starting off, we'll be fully operational and we'll see a true picture of enrollment. So 7188 is a number sort of in between those two. We felt like it was reasonably conservative for all respects when it comes to budgeting. The general operating fund also includes funding for starting new teacher salary of $51,500. That's a $500 starting salary increase from the prior year. But keep in mind, when you're looking at this budget, this is only providing the funding for the budget. You will decide by board action whether you accept the compensation handbook. That will take place actually this evening as well. What I'm assuring you of right now, though, is should you choose to accept that compensation handbook, the funding to support it has been accounted for. So the general operating fund also includes funding for a wage increase. Important to note, I want to make sure that it's clear, is that the teacher salary increase of 3% is based on the bachelor's pay table. We have individuals that are also on the teacher pay table, but perhaps they have a master's degree or perhaps they are a counselor. They receive an additional amount above and beyond the comparable step on the bachelor pay table. The 3% increase is based on the bachelor pay table 1 year to the next. The 3% is not applied to the additional $1,000 or $3,500 that applies to masters or counselors. Now, with respect to all the other employees who are not on the teacher pay table, a 2.5% wage increase is embedded in the budget, and that 2.5% is based on the midpoint of the pay table. So there's a midpoint for every individual that works for the district that is not on a teacher pay table. And that midpoint is what is the basis for the 22.5% for each of those categories of employees. So all of that funding is set aside in the budget, which you'll see momentarily. Let's talk briefly about the Child Nutrition Fund. So during the course of the last basically 2 operational years, the Child Nutrition Fund, the program, has been using a federal stream of revenue called the Summer Feeding Program, which historically, as you can imagine from the name, would only be available to the district during summer months. Why is it advantageous that they've been using this funding source? Because the reimbursement rate per meal is higher. And that was something that opened up as an option to districts. Districts were not obligated to use this funding source, but our Child Nutrition Fund chose to go ahead and make that adjustment, and we're thankful they did, because they were able to maintain operations and not lose the dollars they otherwise would have, because with COVID, with the shutdown in 1920, and then again in 2021, or the reduced participation within the campus environment, all of your funding comes from a meal distribution. So if you're not serving the meals, then you're not going to get the funding. So every drop of added funding that they could that the program could attain, they reached out for, and we're able to actually sustain the program and even put a little bit of money in fund balance, which is really a testament to the operations of that program and the team that's running it. So all students for next year will eat at no charge, and that includes high school students. As you recall, 3 years ago, you approved that the district opt into the community eligibility program, which would allow all students to eat free, but it was going to exclude high school students. And we needed to do that to make sure that the program could sufficiently be sustainable over time, and with the intent of migrating high school students into that program after we had an opportunity to really test the waters. But we haven't had a chance to test the waters because one of the benefits, as I mentioned earlier with the summer feeding program and the Fed stepping in, TDA stepping in, is they've allowed all students to eat free. And so our students have benefited from that. So we really don't have a basis to modify the budget for the child nutrition program right now for next year. What we've decided to do is leave the budget exactly the way it was for the prior year. And as the operations come to fruition next year, if an adjustment is necessary, we'll come to you about that. But there are no changes to the child nutrition budget for the 21-22 school year. The debt service fund is our final fund we'll discuss. And there is going to be an increase to the annual debt service requirement, and that is associated with the debt that was sold in the 2021 school year. That would be the second portion of the bonds that were previously approved by voters. That $64 million that was approved in 2019. We sold a portion of that in the 2019 school year. The other portion we sold last year. And so we'll begin paying back on that next year. But the increase in those debt service payments, the good news is that there's no need to increase the local tax rate, at least as we see it now. And the reason for that is because of the increased property values, as we discussed earlier, as well as the historically low interest rate that we were able to attain on those sold bonds that I just mentioned. Combine that with the fact that there was a bond refunding of the 2014 bonds. We did a refunding in the 2021 school year for those bonds, and that was also at historically low interest rates. So huge savings as a result of those two transactions that were not originally anticipated when we informed the voters of what we thought would be the impact on the tax rate for INS after selling the $64 million worth of 2019 voter-approved bonds. I know it's a lot to say. Hopefully, looks like it's registering okay. So bottom line is no increase in the tax rate. Recommendations for budget adoption. Difficult to see here. It's published in the presentation. I think you can see it a little bit better there. You see all the columns here. Those are broken out by fund. The colors represent a different fund, and then the yellow on the far side represents all funds combined. You'll notice a comparison to the prior year budget for each of the funds. So that's what's in white to the left. It's also broken down on a per pupil basis to give you an idea of how much is being spent in each of the categories within each of the funds spread out by our student population. These are all requirements now in our disclosure for presenting the funds that are to be adopted by the school board. So we have those requirements for you to look at. And that takes us to the end. Happy to answer any questions.
had a quick one. The lunch program, was it offered to all the schools statewide? Or just
It was offered, but you had to take action as a given school district to take advantage of it. So an application process, if you will. And so the National School Lunch Program is the alternative, which is what generally a school district will operate under. And many districts opted to stay with the National School Lunch Program, but they, comes at a cost because they didn't reap the reward of the added funding per meal reimbursement. But it was not by default that you would be in the summer feeding program.
it's just for next year?
Now, for next year, summer feeding program is offered again, and it's offered for the entire year, and we're opting in to that program for the entire year, for next year.
Are there any questions from the board? Members of the public out in the audience, we have any questions or comments? If so, raise your hand. I don't think so. I know that you put an incredible amount of work into this. So just this last couple of slides, it just looks easy to us because we're just looking at numbers and saying, wow, this is great. But I do thank everybody in your staff for the amount of work that's gone into working on this budget this summer, that we're going to look at later this summer. But I know it's been a critical and challenging year with everything that's happened, trying to figure out what direction we're going to take next school year. So.
Very true. Yes.
Thank you.
It's been a collaborative effort amongst not just the business departments, but with all departments, the entire superintendent leadership team, because of the decisions that have been required. So I want to say thank you to everyone that has been involved.
Right, if there are no further questions or comments, Dr. Gutierrez, did you have anything?
I can just echo your sentiments. They've done an amazing job, and I feel like the team has become even more collaborative this year as a result of the challenges that have come our way. But I think that the pandemic has certainly made us better and stronger, and I'm thankful for the collaborative efforts so that we can bring to you all this evening the opportunity to bring a salary increase to our employees who certainly deserve that after just going above and beyond the past 14, 15 months.
All right. All right, if there are no further questions or comments, we'll call this hearing to an end at 6:18.